Hi, I'm Rankin and I'm a photographer, and I'm here at In the Pink Gallery in Loulé in Portugal in the Algarve. So I have been a photographer since 1987, which is when I first picked up a camera. And I've been a professional photographer since 1991. So I think that works out at 32 years. And I started a magazine called Dazed and Confused in the 90s, very early 90s, which was what kind of got me into portraiture and fashion. And I started to really start to do well in probably 1995, 96, at the height of the British explosion of art, music, fashion, photography. This show is called Pure London because when I was approached about doing a show in the Algarve, I thought what would be an amazing series of pictures to put on that we hadn't done before. And really the flower pictures were some of my favourite pictures from the last 3 years since lockdown. And we'd shown them in my gallery in London, but we'd not really shown them anywhere else. And I felt that that was a fantastic place to start. And then everybody got excited by that. And from that, we built the show out. So the pure Rankin is really the purest form of my photography. Like all of the flower photographs I took for myself, and they're not for a commission. And from that, a lot of the photographs in the show are pictures that are really pictures that I love, that work and accompany the flower pictures. So this is probably the first proper show of the flower pictures anywhere in the world. And these are some of the favourites behind. And for me, these are really the only pictures I probably would put on my walls because they feel very pure in terms of why I took them. The pictures behind me are from a series called An Exploding World, and An Exploding World is a series I did during lockdown. And I was always obsessed by dandelions from being a child. I thought that they were almost magical. And I really believed in this idea of when you blow them, you're making a wish. And there's something kind of romantic about that. And there's this strange part of my personality that has that kind of romantic nature to it. I love nature and I love flowers. But during lockdown, I felt so out of control. And I'd been for a while thinking about taking pictures of dandelions burning because there's also part of my character that's quite destructive. So I had not done it to that point. I think I'd done one test of it and I felt really bad about it. And when lockdown happened, there was a kind of deep anger, I think, that I shared with, millions of other people about what was happening. Anger, frustration. I felt very out of control. And I'm definitely somebody that loves to be in control of my life and my work. So I took the kind of the jump to trying out setting the I started by collecting the dandelions. So initially I collected the dandelions. I would have them dotted around the house with Tully kind of getting a bit irritated because we stopped having glasses to put water in because all of the glasses had dandelions in them. And there was something just very magical about having them there. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking they looked so much like a world, and they're kind of world within themselves anyway. And I was obviously on my own, which I hadn't been for quite a long time as a photographer. I hadn't really taken photographs on my own. for about 25, 30 years. And I knew technically how to photograph them, but I was slightly nervous of setting them alight. And I remember the first picture I did, which actually, this picture is one of the first pictures from probably the first, 50 or so that I did. And it was strangely kind of therapeutic to be able to control and explode this world, which was a reflection essentially of what was going on inside my heart and my brain. And there was something so beautiful about doing it as well. And I've always been obsessed a little bit about burning things. I've been setting things alight since probably the early 90s. There's lots of pictures that have got flames in them or fire in them. But this felt like a very sort of reflective image of a lot of people's state of mind. And because of that, it felt that I was creating something uniquely of a moment, which as a photographer, there's a part of you that's always trying to take a picture that reflects the moment you're in. And I really love the pictures, and I love them because they make me feel something. Even now when I see them, I feel this kind of naughtiness, this kind of almost kind of an evil quality to them, whilst also really loving the aesthetic of them because they're so beautiful. I mean, as a piece of nature, they're the most perfect flower in nature. They're the most perfectly designed piece of technology for nature, because the whole essence of them is that the seeds, when they become seeds, with the wind, reproduce, much easier word. The seeds, when they're blown with the wind, reproduce almost immediately. Like they're such a kind of resilient flower. They really come, they reproduce constantly and they reproduce quickly, and they are very, very resilient to the outside world. So kind of taking that perfect piece of nature and destroying it at a moment when nature was having so much control over what we were doing as humans felt like the perfect kind of metaphor for what I was feeling, whilst also making me feel a bit bad about destroying something that's so perfect in terms of nature. But at the same time, because they reproduce so quickly, there's so many, there's millions and millions of them, and there's no real fear of them being destroyed. Plus, at that point in their reproductive, what would it be? Reproductive time clock period. Can't think of the right word. We need ChatGPT. At that moment when they're seeds in their reproductive cycle, they're really not as alive as when they're the yellow flower. So they're kind of at the point of release. So there's a release to them as well, which was something else that I felt very excited about. So, in a very cack-handed way, I've described emotionally why I was photographing them, but at the same time, they make you think, wow, the world and nature and life is so fragile a thing that it can be so easily destroyed. And I kind of felt like a kind of mini God in that moment, which was very strange but very rewarding. It kind of kept me sane, really. So they were one side of a series of pictures that were very important to my mental health during that period. I hate the word mental health. The expression mental health. They were really brilliant for my peace of mind during that period where everything was so kind of up in the air and destructive. actually, this picture here, which is also in the show, is a picture I did in 1996, and it's a picture about fashion. And it was an image that was very inspired by, there's a kind of history of fire. There's a history of fire in photography. So it's very much inspired by people that have photographed things on fire in the past, but it was also a kind of commentary on fashion and how disposable fashion is as an art form. And so many people have asked me how I did that picture, so I won't tell. But it was also about what fashions were in at that time, because there was a lot of people wearing synthetic material. And I went to a party, and my ex-partner said to me, "Oh, and all the people in fashion were there, and they were all wearing these very kind of plastic, sort of highly flammable costumed outfits. They were all wearing these very highly flammable outfits." And she said, "Oh, if you set light to one of them, the whole fashion industry would go on fire." So it's quite a kind of humorous look at fashion, but it's also very striking as an image. A lot of people assume that one photograph is more important than another, and in a way they're never more important than each other. They're very much out there in the world, making their own way in the audience's imagination. And I think that's it's very important for people to understand that my pictures are very much me trying to create an image that I love, that then goes out into the world and has its own lifespan. And it's essentially my photography is about creating some form of emotional or intellectual response from the audience. So once I've taken them, there's something about them that it's a little bit like the seeds from the dandelion. It's like once they've gone, they've gone. And I don't tend to think of one picture being more important than the other. I mean, there are sessions that I've done with, say, for example, the Queen or Bjork, that have been turning points for me in my career. But not one image is the image of the Queen only because she was the most famous person in the world were important. But other pictures have more of a resonance when they have a resonance with other people. So what I love is when people tell me what they love about a photograph, or even if they hate a photograph, I kind of get excited, because for it to have an emotional or intellectual impact on the person, for it to have an emotional or intellectual impact on the person is what I'm aiming for. And I don't have expectation of it. And it's very important that I don't have expectation of it, because if you expect people to like your work, it becomes quite arrogant. And I think one of the things that people see in my work is this connection with the subject, and they see it because it's not arrogant, because it's me trying very hard to be a conduit between who I'm photographing or what I'm photographing and the person that's looking at it, as opposed to the presumption of my view being the most important view. So stylistically, that's why I jump around a lot, because I love to nurture an aesthetic for one concept, and I think it's more important that works for the concept than for me. And in that way, I think I'm probably more of a conceptual photographer or a conceptual artist than most people would assume that I am. And that's also something that I've only really just realized about myself. I think I've done it in the past because it's felt the right thing to do, but one of the brilliant things about looking back at your work to do a show like this or to do a book, is you start to reassess why you've done something. And in the moment, you might not have done it for that reason, but you start to go, oh, well, why did I want to change my style right from the beginning? Because it's something I did right from the beginning. And I go, well, back then I didn't want to really have a name. I wanted it to be, I wanted to be called Untitled. So I was trying to kind of do a Banksy in a way when I first started, but it didn't work for me because I'm far too arrogant, wanting to have some recognition and to be seen. But if you look back at it, and the thread that runs through the work and why I jump around is because I do love the image to come first and not my perspective on the image. And also I love photography, so I love the idea of jumping around stylistically and making images that you wouldn't assume in mind. And one of the funny things, maybe in sort of 2000, 2001, somebody said to me, I can always tell when it's your picture. And I said, how? And they said, it's just a feeling I get when I look at it. And I'm like, but I don't stylistically do the same thing all the time. So if you take that idea of using an aesthetic that's right for the subject that you're doing, whether that's a fashion shoot, a conceptual art piece, a piece of nature, what's different maybe about me to other photographers. And again, please don't think that I'm making judgment on them. I'm not at all. I think, God, I wish I could do that. I wish I could just do the same thing every day, and it would be very easy for me to do that, or much easier, let's say. But I can't do that, because for me, the idea of the collaboration with the subject is more important than me placing my perspective on them. And that doesn't mean that I'm not I'm not looking at them through my lens, because obviously I am, but I'm also trying to work with them. So when I'm taking a portrait of someone, and it doesn't matter if they're famous or not famous, I'm trying to get them to be part of the process of taking that photograph. And I'll do things like, I'll let them edit the pictures, I'll include them on how I'm doing the lighting, and I'm trying to create an environment where they feel comfortable to have a visual transaction, where they're giving the camera and therefore the audience a part of themselves, and I'm being used or using myself on the camera as a way of creating that connection. When I work with Loulé, I tend to do things that are much more extreme in terms of the content of how I'm shooting her, because there's an inbuilt trust between us, and she's entirely part of the creative process. So we take pictures that I probably wouldn't photograph on another model or a subject, because I'm playing with the notions of how far you can take a picture, and she is allowing me to use her in a way that if we weren't in a relationship, it would probably not be appropriate. But because we are in a relationship, the aesthetic of it can be twisted a little bit further. And I think that they're not, that makes the pictures sound really outrageous, and they're not outrageous at all. A lot of them are very humorous, because we have a very similar sense of humor, and we're playing with that sense of humor a lot of the time in the pictures. But I think the main thing is that our relationship allows myself and her to work in a way where we can twist aesthetically the images to somewhere that's quite unique, and I wouldn't do. There's a lot of people I wouldn't want to do that with, but with her it feels like a natural extension. And of course, when you're doing nudes or doing pictures, if you have an intimacy with each other and a trust with each other, it really helps. But of course, when it's your wife, it's an even, it's a strange combination, because she has to trust me more, but because she's my wife, I would be scared shitless to do anything beyond what she felt okay about. It's more when other people look at them and they're like, what's that about? But then we're playing with our relationship as well. And I think that lots of photographers, male and female, and I think lots of photographers, male and female, take photographs as their partners because there's a kind of underlying, what's the right expression for it? I think lots of photographers, male and female, take pictures of their partners because there's a trust and an intimacy you have with a partner that you can't have with anybody else. So you do pictures that are kind of funny and, a bit more unique. I've only ever been in a situation with Tuli where she said no to a picture, and it was because she didn't like the makeup artist and what the makeup artist was doing. And she's very patient. Also, Tuli's very patient as well. So I've done a whole series of pictures with her where she's done 12 body painted calendar images, and every single image took 12 hours for her to be body painted. And we've had a few situations. There's a situation where I photographed her naked in Scotland in the middle of field, and she kept saying, oh, I'm being bitten. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, how are you being bitten? And then that night she came up in this rash because she'd been bitten by midges. And so there's a trust with each other that you can't really have with anybody else apart from a partner. And I've been with people before that I've taken photographs with, but never photographs that intimate. It's probably the best way to put it. And I do think that photographers, whether they're male or female, do tend to photograph their partners, in a way that they probably don't photograph anyone else. So, because the collaboration is even more, the collaboration is deeper. That's probably the best way. I've never actually answered this question before, which is why I'm finding it difficult to answer. It's quite a profound thing when you're photographing a partner, because you have this, it's not just a trust, you always have like a responsibility to them to do something that is, deeply meaningful to you in the relationship. So my first book with Tuli was called Tuli-tastic: A Photographic Love Letter, and it was literally a kind of a letter to her visually of my emotional response to her and how I felt about her. And also she's somebody that loves being creative within the photographic relationship. So she's, and I think, again, this is something that's really important to say, is when I say that I collaborate with people, and I think it's very important to say this, I respect the model that I'm photographing because I know what they bring to the equation. I know what they bring to the image. And I think a lot of people that don't know photography or haven't photographed people in that way assume that models are just there to be, visualized, and they're not. They're absolutely, especially when they're really good at the top of their game, they're probably more important to the photograph than you are as a photographer. In a way, what you're doing is letting them or giving them the platform to express themselves. And sometimes they might not even realize that, but they do bring, I would never say that, I got something out of that model, it's like, no, you really kind of create a relationship with them, or at least I do. That's my approach to it, and I collaborate with them. And I think that's what's beautiful about all the photographs I've taken of Loulé, is that is essential to the relationship. What you're doing within it is creating this collaboration that's really intense and exciting, and it means that you take pictures that you could probably never take with anybody else. I think it's very unique. I'm very lucky to work with some of the most talented people in the world in their category. So whether that's a makeup artist, a hairdresser, a fashion editor, stylist, or a model, I would never take for granted and really rely on collaborating with those creative talents. And I think that models kind of people don't give them as much respect and belief as they should. I think fashion editors get a lot of it, and hair and makeup artists get it, but really it's the team that you put together that makes the images. And I always see my role as being a kind of captain of a ship. In the ship, you couldn't sail the ship without all the other people working together. As a photographer, I've tried so many times to photograph flowers. I was obsessed by Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs of flowers, and totally obsessed by Irving Penn's. And a lot of the time, when you really love another artist or another creative's visual aesthetic on something, you're trying to work out how they found that and where they found their way into it. So for years, I was looking at their pictures thinking, what's so special about their pictures? Not that I wanted to duplicate them or replicate them, because I think that's a very easy way to being not creative. But more because I wanted to try and work out how they'd found the key to unlock the way that they took those pictures. And I was trying to do things like put jeopardy into the images. So one of my ideas was to explode the flowers, to have them hit things, to put them in water and pull them out really fast. And I was trying so many different ways of trying to make some form of tension in the image, or make them have motion, and trying to create an emotional response. And I was getting nowhere. The nearest I got was when I had vases on the edge of plinths or of stools or chairs, and I'd have them, precariously sitting on the edge of something with the flower in it. And they were probably the most successful versions of flowers I'd done. And the difference with them was I used daylight. So I wasn't using any artificial flash or anything that was, controlled. It was using the daylight and working around it. But I still couldn't find a way in. And then when lockdown happened in April 2020, I was essentially in my house, and I had no equipment. I had to get some equipment from my studio. It was all very kind of panicky, just trying to get things to be able to do something, because I knew that I had to take photographs. I knew the one thing that I needed to do was take photographs, and I would go crazy if I didn't. And I was sat in my spare room with me and the flowers and that I'd gathered from the garden and the dandelions. And I was really kind of thinking, well, the last place I got to with this experimentation was with the jeopardy of the vases. And I thought, it's just a bit, it's trying too hard. And the thing about photography is that when you try too hard, you either have a breakthrough or you don't. And I know now when I'm trying to get something and it's not going to work. So I knew that it wasn't going to work with the Jeopardy. I knew that the pictures were just forced, and thought I'd just start taking the pictures, because what else have I got to do? So I started with the flowers before the dandelions, because I had to build up to the dandelions emotionally. And was me in my spare room with a south-facing window, which is beautiful light, with a kind of wall that was almost white but had lots of speckles on it. And I just started to take pictures of the flowers, and it was probably sort of 2 weeks in that I started to do real close-ups, because I felt, well, this might be a way of, if you start really tight on the pictures, that's going to create an aesthetic that not a lot of people do, and it will push you technically to think about it a bit more. And then I did that for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I started to pull back. And then generally, because I was on my own in the room with the flowers, I think that what happened was, because I'm used to so many people being around, I started to create characters. And I think it's almost a reverse sort of psychological thing, because a lot of the time what I'm trying to do as a photographer is work out psychology, to work out the character of a person. So this turned around, and I started to go, well, that's an old woman who's, probably 82, and her name's Dorothy, and she's a bit wizened, and she's had a great life. And I started to pose the flowers, almost humanizing them. And I think, I could see myself taking better and better pictures. And then what I realized was, I just have to take portraits of them. And the minute I started to take portraits of them, everything that I did in my portraiture came to the fore with the flowers. And of course, because of that, I started talking to the flowers. So I'm not somebody that talks to flowers. I talk to my dogs a lot, but I don't talk to flowers normally, or nature. But that talking to the flowers definitely became a way of me taking pictures that I feel good about. And that's the thing about photography. If you don't feel good about the photograph you're taking, if you don't feel like it's, finished, I mean, they're never finished, but when you take a picture, when you press that shutter and you look at it and you go, that's it, move on, let it live now on its own, then it's not a picture. So it took me about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to get to that stage. And then from there on in, I just got better and better and better. And I don't mean that arrogantly at all. I mean that I just started to have a relationship with my subject that felt like I was kind of getting better at having that relationship. And now what's incredible about it for me as a photographer, not necessarily for the audience, is that I don't only do one frame. So I'll get the flower, I'll put it in position, I'll look at it, I'll sort of look at it a bit more, I'll turn it a little bit so I feel like I'm getting the character of it, and then I'll take one frame of it. And sometimes the frames could be, 8-second exposures. So I'm sort of standing really still, trying not to move, because it's, it's in my spare room, so it's a bit wobbly on the floorboards. And that one frame is the picture. And I can take them quite quickly, even though they're 8-second exposures. So it took me a while, but the talking to them and starting to treat them as portraits was the way that I found my way into doing much better flower pictures. The idea for matching the breeding pictures with the flower pictures is that they are both probably the purest forms of portraiture. You don't really see any hair or makeup or styling in the breeding pictures, and really they're the emotional equivalent of purity. So and also the interesting thing about the breeding pictures is the idea behind the breeding pictures was very much from the perspective of somebody that is beautiful to that period of time. That type of subject was a model that really was very androgynous. You couldn't really distinguish between the male models and the female models, and there was something very unique about that, and quite I don't think anybody else had necessarily noticed it. I mean, I think androgyny is something that is very fashionable. It's very much an aesthetic of fashion. When you photograph a lot of people, which I do, you start to see similarities in people. Similar sorts of eyes, similar sorts of hairstyles, eyebrows, the way a lip is formed. And I think what I started to see was this very androgynous thing becoming something that was very much an aesthetic of that moment. And also I started to notice it as a photographer. So visually, I wanted to take pictures that put a kind of spotlight on that, whilst also playing with, the actual gender rules within it. So how someone posed and how they held themselves. And it was quite good. It was quite fun to do that actually as a photographer, because you're generally not allowed to play with those things, or back then you weren't allowed to play with them, whereas I've always tried to play with the rules and break the rules of photography. So they work really well with the flowers, because the flowers are trying to do something similar. I'm not photographing them as flowers. And what's interesting about that is that now I look at Robert Mapplethorpe and Irving Penn, and they're photographing them as flowers, and I'm not. And it to me it's really obvious. So putting them together feels like a nice kind of topping and tailing of something I've done throughout my career. And also that whole thing has become very much a conversation now that I was doing 20 years ago. So for me it was about how I felt people were. There was something so beautiful about that middle ground of like not really having to know if it was male or female, and it not really mattering actually. So I was doing it, and it was quite subtle. I think when I did it, I don't think people even realised. And also I think a lot of people, this is probably the most I've talked about my photography for a long time, because a lot of the time when you're taking a picture, you don't want to imbue it with any meaning beyond the name and the image, because you want the audience to have that conversation with themselves. To hand it to them on a plate feels really ill-mannered to me. It feels like I'm forcing. So I always go, but if you see something in the picture that I don't see, that's brilliant, because I'm doing them for me with a kind of hope that they'll connect with people, but I have no expectation of that. And it's quite funny when people go, I don't get it. I'm like, cool, really cool. It's really not a problem for me that if you don't get it. I think it's really important that it's not ham-fisted, and I think I've learned that over the years. Like even when I'm doing something that's a bit of a punch in the face photographically, I'm doing something that's actually it's slapstick, or it's silly, or it's very kind of obvious in terms of the joke or the humor or the intellect or the emotional response to it. I'm not really worried about it being people getting it or finding it funny. It's like I've really realized that human beings do not have the same opinion about things. So no, I don't think my work is not necessarily about, especially kind of when you talk about it on an artistic level, my work's not trying to change anything. It's trying to create questions. It's trying to, evoke maybe a debate in your conscious or subconscious. So The only time I'm really trying to evoke change is when I'm doing something for a charity, or it's got a kind of purpose behind it, which I have done and do. And they're much more transactional as images. And of course, they come with all the baggage of trying to create a connection with the audience, but they're much more, this is for a reason. Whereas things like the flowers are not. Things like breeding are just like having a feeling about something and going, this is so interesting because I don't think anybody's seen that. Or it's not seen as much as maybe, but turning a lens on it and creating a spotlight for it, that's interesting to me, but it's not heavy-handed. And even when I do something heavy-handed, it's more, it's like da-da-da, it's like, it's the butt of a joke, or it's supposed to be quite sort of dad jokey, or, whatever, however you put it. So there's a lot of pictures that I do that have more slapstick or kind of more punchy meaning, but a lot of the time what I'm actually doing with those types of pictures, none of them are actually in this show, but I'm trying to make a point about our mediated world and how we have kind of created this idea that this is okay and this isn't okay. So for example, when we first started the magazine Dazed and Confused, a lot of the times we were trying to create covers that you'd never seen before, because when we would go to meetings with the distributors, they would say, okay, we want them to be a blonde girl with blue eyes, with a very good smile, looking directly at the lens, and we want the lens to be a little bit above the person. And we went, why do you want people like that? And they said, well, they sell more. And what we realized is there's an homogeneity to image making that, especially in the kind of consumer magazine space, or maybe what you call the Instagram space now, or the social media spaces, there's homogeneity. So one of the projects I wanted to do a few years ago was finding every town's Kim Kardashian, which is the kind of the Swansea Kim, who's the Swansea Kim Kardashian, who's the York Kim Kardashian, because her aesthetic had become so homogenized within the way we mediate images. And to me, that would be more of a slapstick visual critique of what we're doing. So, when I do some pictures, I'm playing with notions of what's appropriate, or what the rule is, or what's become the rule or the norm. And that's the way I'm doing it. I'm doing it from a kind of jokey perspective, whereas something like the flowers and this show actually is much more subtle. I think that's probably the only picture that is more in your face. But even then, there's something quite kind of, it's from a distance. It's kind of quite contained as an image. It's all about, visually, it's drawing you into that picture, and I'm playing with notions of what form are and perspective. But most of the pictures in this show are much subtler. They're much more about making the audience feel something and then think something. Even which are quite angry as pictures, there's something beautiful about them. So there's something quite subtle about them in a way as well. So, and also again, it's like, I try not to sort of tell people how to look at the pictures, because that would be awful and not what I'm about. So this gallery in the pink, I have to say, is one of the best galleries I've shown in the last 10 years. And I think the reason that I love it so much is because the care and attention that has been put into the design and construction of it, and the feeling you get in the space is very conducive to showing photographs, because it's not overwhelming. And the worst thing that you can do when you create a gallery is make the gallery more important than the pictures that you're showing. So the balance in this space is so kind of finely tuned that you feel very comfortable looking at the pictures, and you feel very kind of proud to have them on the wall. And also just the way that the windows work really suits the natural light of how pictures look best, really. I think that when you overlight pictures, you make them too prominent, or you make them under prominent, and this is a great balance for it. So I think generally the space has got such good atmosphere, but overall I think that the idea of a space here in the Algarve is a really extraordinary thing to do, because I think that, just the people I met coming to the private view last night, there's a real desire to have culture here, and you guys at the space are really bringing something that is unique to this area, but also it's unique within the world of photography, because I probably have 5 galleries that I work with all the time in Europe, and all of them have got this same level of passion and understatement that make the work really work. And this space, especially this actual space, really worked for showing photographs. You never quite get over how exciting it is to have your work big on a wall. The buzz of it, it takes what you do, on a daily basis, and it kind of amplifies it celebratorily. It amplifies it in a celebratory way that you can't not get goosebumps and get excited about seeing it. And I think anybody that says that they're bored of showing their work, or that their work bores them, my work excites me. I see so many new and different things in my work when I see it this size, and again, it's what it means to me. It's really weird. It's like I got very excited about seeing the dandelions outside through the window, because a kid's going to go past and get excited about that image. I know that one child will just be like, what? And you just never know where that what or why or how goes to. And that idea of planting seeds in people's imaginations is kind of what the work's about, why you do it. So seeing your work big and knowing that they're with the size of a picture and it being on a wall, there's a kind of celebration of it, and also there's an inability to ignore it. That someone might walk past here and they see the picture and it means something, or they might walk in, they might see it and walk in and then start talking about it, and that idea that your piece of work lives in that person's mind, even if it's for a few minutes or seconds even, that's much better than any other experience that somebody can have with your photographs. Because unfortunately, especially these days, most of that is on a very small screen. So there's nothing wrong with that, but this way of seeing your work and other people experiencing it, that's dead exciting. So yeah, I love it, but and I never get bored of it. I've never walked in and gone, oh, I'm not interested. I'm like, I want to see it. You saw me when I came in. I'm like, okay, let me see everything. And then I want to see other people's work, because then you get excited about other people's work, because the whole feeling of an exhibition and the reason for showing it is to have an impact on the audience and yourself. The thing about books, any book that you create or produce, or any magazine actually, is that they're kind of like time capsules for your work in the way that exhibitions are kind of the performative, momentary thing. Like they're normally for a few months or a few weeks even, and there's something that's not permanent about them. That's exciting. It's like, you know, the band going on tour and playing live. That's the exhibition. The book is the album of the work, and there's something about them that has that feeling of you're really putting a time capsule into the world of what you were feeling and thinking with that work at that moment in time. And if it's a new body of work, that's very exciting, because a lot of times people haven't seen it before, and it's your kind of way of going, okay, this is how I see my work and how I want you to view it and experience it. But again, they go out into the world and they kind of have a life of their own in the same way. You know, people might come here and go, God, that was a terrible gig. You know, he didn't do a good job of that gig. You try never to do that. You try to always, you know, whether it's a book or whether it's an exhibition, you're trying really hard to put the best presentation of your work together, and then you've got to let it go. But what I love about books is, you know, people will find them and contact you and say, oh, I just found this book, and I bought this book, or I didn't know you did this book, and it transports them back to the moment in time that you put it together. And the passion and the kind of intensity of putting a book together can't really match it. It's like, you know, literally doing an album. Every detail you put so much effort into. So that's my whole thing about doing exhibitions and books. I've done them right from the beginning of my career, is because I didn't want to be somebody that, you know, was on the guest list, or somebody that's even on, you know, like on the bill, but it's not their gig. So I've always wanted to be the person that put their own albums out and the person that did their own gigs. And I think that's probably why my work has a resonance beyond, you know, being in a magazine or being on Instagram, or, you know, doing work for brands or taking photographs of celebrities. That obviously has an effect or an influence on it, but because I did books and did exhibitions right from the beginning, it was almost, I took my work seriously by doing that, and therefore people took my work seriously because I took it seriously. So I think that if you're a photographer, you should always reinvest in yourself, or any creative actually. You should always invest in yourself and always be trying to put your work in context for people, because that really does excite them. You know, it excites people to see how you see it, and then they get something else from that as well. So that's why I do books. And I think what a lot of people don't realize about me and magazines is I wanted to be a photographer. I discovered photography at 21, just turning 21. And from the moment I discovered photography, I wanted to be a photographer more than anything in the world. Like I discovered the magic potion. I discovered the thing that really turned me on. You could never tempt me away from photography. Any drug, any sex, anything. You couldn't. I love it. Even if you said you can go to the moon, I'm like, I'm fine. If I've got photography, I'm fine. And it's been the best thing in my life, and probably saved my life, because it's really made me be able to see the world and show the people how I see the world through it. But what my second love was the day that I started to do photography at London College of Printing. I walked into the front of the building, up into the library on the left and the refectory up the stairs, and there was this person giving out a magazine at that door. So the first day of my, you know, photography course at the photography degree that I'd chosen to go to, which was quite an important one back then, this person was giving out a magazine called Succession, which is a great name, obviously. And I said, who does this magazine? And she said, we do it, I do it. And I went, what? And she went, yeah, I'm the editor. And I said, what, you made this thing? And she went, yeah. And she said, do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah. And she said, come to the student union and we'll get you working on it. So the next day, I think it was like even that day, I did my first few lectures and I ran in to the student union. I said, where do I sign up? So all the way through my photography course, I was doing student magazines, and I pretty much taught myself with the help of other students how to make magazines as I was becoming a photographer. And those two things have probably been the making of me as a photographer, because it meant that I created a magazine called Dazed and Confused, and I became the arbiter of my own work, or the kind of commissioner of my own work. So it meant that if I wanted to photograph someone, I could literally say, well, I've got a magazine, and it gave me a discipline around photography, which meant that I was always thinking of a deliverable to the publication. And that discipline really helped me understand how other people commission and what they were looking for from me as a commissioned photographer. But it also meant that I was always obsessed by putting my work into something that then go out into the world and have a life of its own. So it's really been a parallel career for me as being a publisher. And if I didn't take photographs, which I can't imagine, I would probably just be a publisher. But I don't think the two of them, they're so interlinked now. So, and I still believe in them. I still believe in print much more than I believe in digital. I have done over 40 books now. I think we're actually on 50. And I've done, literally thousands of magazines. I mean, I'm not even on hundreds anymore. So the thing that is so important about books is, very few people can come into a gallery and afford to buy a print on the wall, but they can afford a book. And the great thing about a book, and I'm not saying that everybody should do it, is you can tear it out and put it in a frame and put it on your wall. And I think that democracy of art is something that you can't get that really from any other platform. And the person that said it in those words to me was Damien Hirst, where we were talking about books, and he said, great, I'm not going to do his accent actually, although I can. So the great thing about books is they literally democratize art, because any kid can go into a museum and pick up a book and take it home and look at it. And the democracy of art is the exact opposite of the kind of rarity in art. And I think that that's such an amazing thing, because the two things go hand in hand. So that's the other reason I love books, because they do make it easy for people to own your work without having to spend too much money.